Dupree, W. from South Carolina.
All right.
Well, first of all, can you hear me all right? I've been trying to get to Amarillo for 2 years, and 2 years ago I was invited, and my home burned down, and the only thing I had left was a pair of ice cream pants and a little short sleeve shirt, and it was a beautiful plantation home. It just absolutely destroyed me to lose it, and I acted so very human, and I just got so depressed I just couldn't come out here. And so Dolly called me this year and asked me if I would come to Amarillo, and I said yes. And I said, and do you remember the tragic circumstances that occurred in my life the last time I was invited to Amarillo? And she says she remembered that. And I said, well, that's behind me, thank God. That was 10 o'clock in the morning. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, I had a heart attack, and I was in the hospital. 10 days later, I was dead. So I can get to heaven probably a lot easier than I could get to Amarillo. I intend to enjoy it. Well, I like that I made it, I'll tell you. My name is Dupree Westbury, and I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. Hi, everybody. And I've got a sobriety date of April 22nd, 1964. I talk funny. You have already noticed that. Out in the popcorn room today, somebody asked me, said, where are you from? And I had that same question posed to me in Chicago. For some reason, the people in Chicago think everything started there and went east and west. But I said, I'm from South Carolina, by God, one of the 13 original colonies. And my family came here in 1680. So that quieted that situation down somewhat. But I do talk funny. It's a sort of gullah language that we utilize out there, and we're quite proud of it. And I want you to pay particular attention to what I've got to say. I don't want you to miss anything because of the strange dialect that I used, because it took me 2 years and a great expense to get here. And I want you to listen. And listen carefully. We had a family reunion back home one time, and two sisters were talking to each other, and they hadn't seen each other in a good while. And one said to the other sister, do you and your husband still have mutual climaxes? And she thought for a minute, and she says, no, I think we got Blue Cross Blue Shield. So we came here tonight to talk about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. That's what we came to talk about. Now, the first thing we have when we come to Alcoholics Anonymous, in the preamble, that Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship. And Kathy and I, if we went home right now, this very minute, would have had our lives enriched as a result of these precious few hours that we have had to spend with you. But we know with the people who has already appeared on this program, and particularly that lovely person who tried to be a nun this afternoon, and people like, you think I talk funny. You wait till you hear this joker from Laguna Beach tomorrow. And Buddy Ross and all of these people, and Ken and Shirley, who we just met today, and all of you whom we have met since we've been here, just made our lives so much richer. But we hear that this is a fellowship, and truly this is what it is. It's a fellowship of people who care about each other and share with each other. This is why we get well. the caring and the understanding that we have for each other is the success of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we are people who love you before you love yourself, and love you in spite of yourself. And we understand who you are. So fellowship is important. I tell this story about a couple that lived in a city one time and wanted to move out into the country and raise some little hogs. They got a mama hog and put that hog in a pen. And every morning that man would go out to see if they had any little hogs. And every morning he went out, they did not have any little hogs. So he was discussing with the neighbor the problem, they wanted some little pigs. And the neighbor said, why don't you go down the road and see the veterinarian? He can tell you how that mama hog can have you some little pigs. So he went down to see the veterinarian. The veterinarian read him chapter 5 on how you have little pigs. He says, that mama hog has got to have some fellowship before you can have any little hogs. So he went back home and got that hog out the pen, put it in the wheelbarrow, and rolled it down to the Joneses, who had a fellowship in hog, and they had some fellowship. Brought her back home and put her in the pen, and he must not paid attention to what the vet said. He went back out next morning, and he didn't have any little hogs. So he put that mama hog in the wheelbarrow and back down to the Joneses for more fellowship. And the third morning, his Al-Anon wife, I guess, was up earlier than he was, and he said to her, honey, would you go out and see if we have any little hogs? And she came back in very shortly, and she said, no, but the mama hog's in the wheelbarrow ready to go. So you take these old sick alcoholics, and bring them to the top of Texas, and they don't want to come to start with, All drawn up in a knot like a $5 Georgia mule, and that's being very deformed. And you bring them here, and you put them in the wheelbarrow, and you love them, and you roll them around to the popcorn room and down to the end where they got the big hunk of cheese. You let them go through this 2-minute process of hugging and kissing and holding hands and embracing each other, and then you go through that sincere effort to wish everybody in this room God's will and God's love and sobriety. And you never have to worry when you go back by the house whether they'll get in the wheelbarrow to come or not. They'll be here. So it's a fellowship of people. That's what we are. They said for a long time, and I came into Alcoholics Anonymous when we had 3 choices: the graveyard, the asylum, the jailhouse, and Alcoholics Anonymous. There weren't any treatment centers, and there wasn't very much that you could do for the alcoholic. It was very difficult in those days. There's a lot that can be done today, and a lot being done for the treatment of alcoholism, and this story illustrates that something can be done. I live in the swampy, flat areas of South Carolina. We have too much water. Out here, y'all don't have any water. A great deal, but anyway. And these 2 fellows are sitting on the log fishing. And one of those cottonmouth snakes crawled up behind one and bit him on the part that was hanging off the back of the log. And he turned around and he saw what had happened. He told his buddy John, he said, would you run to town and get the doctor and bring him down here, and because this snake's done bit me and I'm going to die. And John took off to town like an Olympian athlete, just as hard as he could go, rushed in the doctor's office, told the doctor the tragedy that had occurred in the woods with his friend, and told him to go down there with him immediately to save his life. Now, this doctor is like every other doctor. He was busy. So he says, I'll tell you what, if you take this knife and go down there and make a cut right where that snake bit your friend and suck the blood out of that area so it won't get into his bloodstream, and give him these 2 pills to take, you can save his life. The fellow grabbed a knife in one hand, the 2 pills in the other, and out of the office he went. And he started running back down in the woods to take care and save his friend's life. And the nearer he got to his friend, the more he thought about what he had to do. And after a while, the fellow that the snake had bit's laying there on the ground waiting to die, and he has this slow shuffle through the leaves. And he said, Bill, is that you? He said, yes. He said, well, what did the doctor say? He said, the doctor said to tell you there ain't nothing we gonna do for you. You can die. So for a long time, alcoholics didn't have anyone to do anything for them. We just died. Now that's a fact. And today we got treatment centers. Today we got public broadcast. Today we got information. Today we know that alcoholism is a treatable illness. We know that the family is afflicted and affected, and everybody can get well. So that's joyous news. And it makes you free, and you ought to be happy to hear that. So that takes care of all those three words. And you need to do something about it too. If you're an alcoholic, a new person. I like to talk to the new person when they come into the room. You got to get involved in this program and do something. We had a couple one time that wanted to compete in a masquerade party, and they dressed up, hoping to win, probably had alcoholic characteristics, and he said, I think I will dress like Ferdinand the Bull. And she said, well, I think I will dress like a female cow. And of course they couldn't ride to the masquerade ball in that getup, so they decided that they would walk to the party. And while they were walking to the party, they passed a pasture with a real bull in it. And that real bull seen that woman dressed up like a pretty lovely young cow and went to pawing the ground and carrying on and came charging toward them over there walking down that road. And the woman saw the bull coming, and she turned to her husband and said, honey, look at that bull come running at us. What are we going to do? And he says, I'm going to stand here and make out like I'm eating grass, but you better hold on to something. So Alcoholics Anonymous is something we can hold on to. And get into this program and hold on to it. My 5 minutes are up. I'm going to light a cigarette. John Ackland, I'm still smoking Camels. Yeah, I had the surgery the other day. See, when I died, they cut me open and did a transplant and give me one inside bypass and 3 outside bypasses. They told me that this inside bypass was going to help my blood circulation, and they told me to leave women, whiskey, and cigarettes alone. So I haven't been able to. I left the whiskey alone. I'm still smoking. And this just occurred a few weeks ago, so I think I'm making a remarkable recovery. You know. So, and my cook told me a cigarette every now and then wouldn't hurt me. I don't know when I became an alcoholic. Back home, people walk up to me and they said, Mr. Dupree, how you doing now? How are you doing now? Anybody ever ask you that? They remember how you were. I didn't want to be no alcoholic. I certainly did not want to be an alcoholic. I went to no extra classes to be an alcoholic. I grew up in the Baptist South, and the Baptists were kind of like they weren't for or against anything. Anything you did, you'd go to hell. If you played cards, you'd go to hell. If you went to the picture show, you'd go to hell. If you drank liquor, you'd go to hell. And if you committed adultery, that is, sleep with another woman, or get in the back seat of the car with one, or wherever, you wouldn't even have a chance to die. You'd go to hell from right there. So I never shall forget the first time I went out with a girl. She was pretty. She was 16 years old, and I was not much older than that. And she had on one of these fuzzy Angora sweaters, and it was a beautiful sweater, and it was a two-handed sweater. And I kissed that girl in the mouth, and I never had kissed anybody in the mouth. You know, my aunt would kiss me goodbye, and my grandmother would kiss me hello, and things like that. But when I kissed that girl in the mouth, I knew that I had found something good, but I didn't want to quit, but Mother had taught us to be somewhat modest and some moderation, so finally I quit, but after a while we did it some more. But anyhow, I liked it. And the girls down home were kind of like AA. They said, if you want what we have. And you're willing to go to any length to get it. I wanted it. I didn't know what it was, but I wanted it. I can tell you that. I have always enjoyed girls. Hell, look at that. Look on the front row. I married Kathy. She's kind of young, but holding up well, I think. We got a little 2-year-old daughter called Doodle. Her name is Catherine Elizabeth Westbury. Very English name. And an old AA friend of mine called the other day and told Kathy, said, I knew that old husband of yours could plow, but I didn't know he could plant, you know. So I don't want to be no alcoholic, but I want to do some of these things. I want to do it because I got a natural need to do it. I want to do it. It feels good. And all of these things. And the first time I ever got drunk in my life, I walked around, beat myself on the chest, and proclaimed that I was a red-eyed Edisto Indian. There's no such tribe ever been in South Carolina. And the last time I got drunk, I knew that I was an alcoholic. I was not an instant alcoholic in the sense that I became alcoholic from the beginning. I enjoyed drinking a long, long time. I was in World War II. I didn't do anything to start it. But I did help finish the thing, you know, really. And I got 5 medals home on display for people to see that I won in that war, and I'm proud of them because it was a war where we had a great deal of unity and common purpose in fighting. And at home we dress sometime formally for dinner. And everybody puts on their formal clothes, and we sit in the formal dining room, and the food is served. And I'm sitting there with my row of ribbons on, and in the center is the World War II Victory Medal, which is a very beautifully ribboned medal with a bronze thing hanging on it, you know. I even got one for good conduct. But anyhow, my daughter, who's sitting on my right, so she said, Daddy, what is that prettiest ribbon there for? And I said, that's the World War II Victory Medal. It's the last time that gentlemen fought each other that had any culture or civilization or enough sense to stop fighting or start fighting. And incidentally, it was the largest war the world has ever known. And she looked at me and she said, I knew it had to be a big one or you wouldn't have bothered to go. I've been hospitalized 42 times for drug addiction and alcoholism. I talk about alcoholism, I talk about drug addiction, and I talk about recovery. If there's any pure alcoholics in the audience who can't stand addiction, you might as well get up and leave. You can have your damn feelings hurt right now. And if you don't like Al-Anon, you better go, because I'm going to talk about that a little bit too. But anyway, I keep drinking and doing these things that give me pleasure. You know, we don't have a choice in life. I didn't. When it came to what gave me pleasure and what relieved the pain in my life, I made the choice for the pleasure and the relief for the pain, not what seemed to be wise. And I was told many times that I was drinking too much and that I shouldn't drink like that. Now, I married a beautiful girl the first time. And I've heard people say that alcoholics don't love their families. I submit to you that that is a damn lie. We do love our families. Alcoholics want to love and need to be loved as desperately as any people I have ever met. And we know so little about either being loved or giving love. And this woman was so pretty, before we had frost-free refrigerators, she could put her hand on the outside and defrost that sucker. And I had a pretty little old blonde-headed boy and a beautiful little old brown-eyed girl. And if Daddy could have come home sober and had any choice, Daddy would have done that, but Daddy couldn't do it. Daddy come home drinking. And Daddy loved her. And it got to the point that Daddy had no control whatsoever over the way that Daddy would come home. You know, I don't know when you get to be an alcoholic, but I can tell you it's about as difficult as this. If you don't go to the bathroom from Monday till Monday, I defy you to tell me what day you got constipated during the week, whether it was Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. So you never know when you become an alcoholic. And it was too late when I discovered that I was one. I wanted to quit and I couldn't quit, and I didn't know how to quit. And I've abused my family and done all sorts of things that people talk about they didn't want to do. I did that to people that I loved. And it hurt me. The book says that resentments probably are the greatest cause of people drinking again. I think differently. One of the two problems that I see most prominently and troubled me as more than anything else in my life was guilt. Knowing better and doing wrong, guilt paints me red and pushes me in a corner. And I continue to drink and continue to drink and continue to drink. I grew up poor. I remember doing homework in the afternoons when we had one pencil, and one brother would do his homework and use the pencil, and then one of the others would get the pencil to write with. And my grandfather was a very wealthy man. And today I'm a wealthy man. I continued to live like this and did not want to live like this. And this was alcoholism. I would come home one day and raise the roof and carry on and fight with the wife and try to kill her and beat the children and have little blue spots on their heads. And I'd kick the dog until the rib cages would be broken in and not know anything about it. I'd wake up in the morning with a loaded shotgun laying in my bed beside me and not knowing when I put it there. And of course the family was gone. And I wondered what I had done. And I wondered if they would come back. And I never knew what I did. And one day they did not come back. But I went to a doctor one time to get some help, and you heard it read up there tonight that no human power can relieve our alcoholism, but I thought so. By this time I was making a lot of money, and I went to a doctor and told him who I was, and he was a doctor that charged something like $50 a visit. Now, you could go to a doctor here in Amarillo and pay $10, and if he's in AA, he's going to tell you, go home, it's ridiculous, and don't take nothing, or somebody else will give you something to go. But you go to a $50 doctor, you cannot find out what's wrong with you that day. He said, if you'll come back next week, and I explained some of my symptoms and touched lightly on the fact that I drank some. And he said, come back next week and meet with me on Tuesday afternoon and we'll discuss this. So that when I got back, he had a folder prepared. And that folder had my name on it and where I lived and what my phone number was and everything. The only thing it didn't have on there was this. He said, Mr. Westbury, my nurse failed to ask you an important question. Anytime there's any failure in the medical profession, it's always the nurse that takes the blame. What is your income? The treatment that I'm about to give you is expensive. And I told him, don't you worry about my income. I have plenty of money. Don't ever tell a doctor anywhere that you've got plenty of money. Never do that. But what he said now, he said, you are a very nervous person. And I'm going to give you some medication to calm you down. And then I'm going to teach you hypnosis. And when I press you on your right shoulder, I'm going to make a suggestion to you that you will go into a hypnotic trance and you'll never drink again. And I'm going to teach you how to do this to yourself. And anytime you want to take a drink, you just think about a special number that I'll train you to say, and you won't ever want to drink anymore as long as you live. And I say that that's good news to a suffering alcoholic. Yes. I didn't want to do those things I had done before. Now I'm going to start talking about drugs, And people ask me sometime, what's the difference between drugs and alcohol? All right, you could take this lady right here and give her a couple of drinks, and she's walling around down here on the floor. An alcoholic will try to walk and talk if they're drinking, without fail. Now, you can take the same lady and fill her up with dope, and she's stretched out here like a pharaoh mummy on this floor right in front of this podium. And she's staring straight up into the sky, and you walk by and look at her and ask her how she's feeling and if anything is wrong, and she'll say, no, I'm fine. So if alcoholism produces the use of alcohol, a temporary type of insanity, then drugs produce a total insanity. So this man gave me some medication to take in the vein. I never have had any drugs before. He lies me down and he takes this right arm and he ties it off tight with a rubber band. And he said, Mr. Westbury, this is a 10 cc syringe with an 18 gauge needle. And I'm filling this with 7 grains of sodium amytal, and I'm going to stick it into this blood vessel right here. And when I stick it into the blood vessel, I'm going to pull back on the plunger. And when you see that blood rush out of your arm into that plunger, it means that I've got the needle right in the vein. Because if I didn't do that and get the air out of this thing, I could kill you. You see, anytime you're paying somebody $50 to treat you, and he thinks you got some money back home, they do not want you to die. So if you never have had any dope in your life, it's like the first time you had sex. You really got a treat coming. So he takes that plunger and he says, now I'm going to start easing this medication into your system, and when you begin to feel better and get comfortable so that we can go into this hypnotic trance that we go train you to do, wiggle that finger. That same one wiggling one you see right now. And when he started to pushing that dope into my vein, and I felt so good all over, I could not say stop. I appreciated myself so much, I just let him give me all of the dope, and I just went to sleep. And when I woke up, you know what I told him? I said, well, I reckon it didn't work. We'll have to do it again. So the first time that I had the opportunity to take drugs, I wanted more right then. And he gave me drugs to take in the morning at 10 o'clock. He gave me something to take at 12. He gave me some to take in the afternoon at 4. Some to take in the afternoon when I came home so the children wouldn't bother me. And some stuff so I could get some sleep. Now, if you want to get off alcohol and alcohol is your problem, here's your opportunity to get off alcohol. Start taking dope. It'll get you off alcohol and women. Period. Now, I have to walk down the street with my wife to keep people from thinking there was something funny. But that was about the only reason. And she disliked that, I can tell you that. But I'd go to see this doctor and take this treatment, and we'd get in this room where it was quiet, and they had a blue light in the back, and Mr. Westbury would look at the blue light, and he'd start the metronome to ticking, and every time it ticks, Mr. Westbury, breathe in, and every time it ticks, Mr. Westbury, breathe out, and it ticks, breathe in, when it ticks, breathe out, and when you have done this 3 dozen times, you'll be in a trance. And he's chanting to me all this time. And one time when he did that, he stuck a pin all the way through my arm, and I didn't even know anything about it. And I went home and told my wife what we were doing to cure my alcoholism. I don't know why it is that alcoholics marry people with such low mentality. They don't understand anything that we do or trying to do. Nothing. So she said, well, I'm drunk now. I can't even drive the car home. I get a cab to bring me home. And I come crawling up the steps, and she's on the phone talking to her mother. And she says, I'm so proud of Dupree, he has quit drinking. I couldn't even walk. So she asked me one night, she says, exactly how do y'all do this hypnotic training? I said, oh, you wouldn't understand that. She says, well, tell me at least. So I said, all right. First of all, you got to have a quiet room. Alcoholics don't have a quiet room. We got to put up with all of y'all. I said, but I'll tell you what we'll do. We got to have a metronome, and you took piano. Go in the kitchen, we didn't have a metronome, and bring me a biscuit pan. And she went in there, and she got a biscuit pan, and she sat down on the end of the sofa. And I went in there and got me a handful of them pills that I'm supposed to take, and swallowed them, and drank some hot coffee behind it, so it would melt the cellophane off them pills right quick, so I would get drunk right fast, so I could get hypnotic. Then we turned the television over there to a station that don't have nothing on it, and this is going to be my light. I'm going to look at this TV set, and I'm sitting in the middle of the sofa, and she's sitting on the right-hand side, and the biscuit pan is laying on the arm, and I tell her to start hitting on that pan with a rhythm. And she starts to breathing, and she starts to hitting on the pan, and I start breathing and watching that TV set, and those two little children start circling through the house, and they come through like two untrained bird dogs, and every time they get to the den where we are, they stop and look at Daddy. Mama's beating on a biscuit pan watching the Daddy, and Daddy's looking at the TV set, and ain't nothing on the TV set. And people say that this is not a family illness. But I want to get well, and I keep taking my pills, and I ain't drinking no liquor. I get the Pepsi-Cola look long before they ever think about it. I get thin, and I turn white again. And one day I woke up about 11 or 12 o'clock, and God almighty, I have missed my 8 o'clock pill. And my 10 o'clock pill. And it's 12 o'clock, almost time for my 12 o'clock pill. And I'm going to a funeral that afternoon at 3 o'clock. So what do? I want to get well. I take my 8 o'clock pill, my 10 o'clock pill, my 12 o'clock pill, and one for the funeral. And I just take them all one time. And I go down there to this funeral. Now, an alcoholic can make out at a funeral. People down there are distraught and crying. They don't take anybody's inventory. They don't be smelling nobody's breath. Everybody's sad, crying, the hair pulled down in their eyes, and it's just carrying on thing. And I love to go to them funerals and tell that woman how much I loved her husband. I didn't even know the fella, but it was just a good opportunity for me to get involved with things. And I thought people might forgive some of the things that I had done publicly if I attended these funerals. So this is how I treated myself. And finally, this thing got so bad. Now taking dope ain't like drinking liquor. You can drink a pint today and a pint tomorrow and a pint tomorrow and a pint tomorrow and a pint tomorrow. When you start taking dope, it's like new math. That son of a gun's got a fast multiplicating factor to it. You take 2 today and 4 tomorrow and 8 the next day and 12, and you don't ever get enough anymore. You just keep trying to get back on that mountain, you know. And you can't do it. And it wasn't long before I was taking 100 quarters of morphine a day and 60 grains of barbiturates. I've gone bird hunting many days in my life and pulled my breeches leg up and took out 10 2cc vials of Demerol and popped the top off of all 10 bottles and took a needle and stuck it into my leg and took 20 cc's of Demerol in the vein and let the blood run out of the needle into the boot while I was doing it and killed the next bird that came by. And I wound up in Lexington, Kentucky in the U.S. Public Health Hospital there. And when I got to Lexington, Kentucky to come off these drugs, they give me a number. And that number was 66777. Full house. And it was July the 3rd of 1962. And I remember just before leaving the little town of St. George, I had gone to the funeral home to visit an alcoholic friend of mine who had died. Only the week before that, I had taken him to the bootlegger, and he came and begged me, and they called me Uncle Duke. He said, Uncle Duke, would you take me out to get a drink? And I said, yeah, Roy. And I took him out there, and while he was waiting on the bootlegger to get up and bring him a bottle, he turned silently and with a great deal of embarrassment away from me, and he vomited on the ground. And I looked later, and there was a huge spot of blood. My friend was dying. And just before I boarded the plane to go to Lexington, Kentucky, I went by the funeral home and touched his cold face. And while I was in Lexington, Marilyn Monroe died from an overdose. It never occurred to me that these things could happen to me. And I'm in Lexington in this prison, and they tell me in there don't but 1 out of 1,000 ever get sober. Now these boys that come walking the streets of New York sniffing this milk, this quinine and milk sugar and stuff like that, in a couple of days' time they're on their feet and they're ready to go back to Brooklyn. But those boys that come from the South is cooking on the front burner and taking that real dope, Bubba, it takes a long time to come off. And we don't believe, Mr. Westbury, you are that one that's going to make it. 1 out of 1,000 will make it, but not you. Now that's interesting. And the fact that people are not in charge of who's going to get sober. It says on page 98 of the big book, it says on page 98 of the big book, regardless of anyone, if we'll clear house and clean house and trust in God, we can have sobriety. Suppose we had a sobriety committee, and they were up here in the front of the room, you know. Top of Texas eligibility committee to come to get sober. And you come in the door, and I come in walking in the back door, and they said, that's that old boy from South Carolina who used to take dope, ain't he? And they said, yeah. I'll bet that old sucker's coming back here to get a white chip trying to get sober, wants to join our group. And they hurry up and meet, and they decide that they aren't going to let me join. Isn't it wonderful that it's left up to God? The federal government could cure you then from drug addiction. I don't think they'll admit to that now, but back in those days they could. I finally got out of that place and came home. And as soon as I checked out of that hospital, I bought a pint of whiskey, drank all I could at the men's restroom, and got on a flight to come home to my family. And not long after that, everything that I had was gone. They told me I'd take drugs again, and I did. I spent every dollar I had for drugs, or either alcohol. And I wound up at my mother's home, and occasionally my father would give me $1. And I would take that $1 downtown, and Short Camel cigarettes were 30 cents a pack, and Vitalis hair tonic was 69 cents a bottle. And I would get me a bottle of Vitalis hair tonic, and I would come back to the house and go into the bathroom and shake it out into a glass. And I'd mix it with a little bit of hot water, and I would drink it. Thank God that was before the dry look. I'd shake just a little bit on my head. I submit to you that if alcoholism is an illness, I see nothing funny about that one person who is still drinking. I see people sometimes say, I saw old Carl the other night down on the corner of 12th and Vine, just as drunk as a lord. Ha, 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 ha. I have never laughed when I saw the alcoholic drunk. And if it is an illness, then it needs medication. And you and I, by God's grace tonight, and by our own free will and by work and attending AA meetings, are taking a different kind of medication tonight for our being sober, for our illness. We aren't drinking. So I'm living there with Mother, and I ain't hoping for nothing, and I ain't believing nothing, and I ain't looking for nothing. Because everything's gone, and I don't want to live, and I've tried to kill myself several times, and it doesn't work. And you can't die, and you wake up sick, and you don't want to wake up, and you wake up sick, and you don't want to wake up, and you run out of money and you quit with the hair tonic and you ain't got no dope to take and you're still alive, and what are you going to do? And one day I was sitting out on that porch one night, and I was looking out into the darkness, and my mother came out there and said to me, I was at the beauty shop today. That's what we called them a long time ago. And Mary Kirby came in that beauty shop and said that she and her husband Joe were going over to Walterboro, which is 20 miles away in South Carolina. That's a long distance. It's all the way across one river. And they've been going over there to something called AA. And her husband Joe has been sober almost a year as a result of their going. And she asked me if you would like to go with them to that AA thing. And you know what my remarks were? Why does she give a damn about me? Why does she care? The people that should care aren't here. Who wants to go to an alcoholic meeting, divorced, no call, needing a drink, no job, and no money? Now, when God gets ready to do something for you, God does it. And God does not do it logically. Father Martin came down to St. George to speak at my 15th AA birthday, and mothers are not normally good Al-Anons. And she was in attendance that night, and she followed him around for a little bit, and she looked at him and she said, Father, you have no idea how many nights I laid awake and cried and prayed for that boy to get sober. And with the wisdom of Solomon, he turned to her and said, Mrs. Westbury, more people are prayed into Alcoholics Anonymous than happen to wander in. Mama just lit up like a lighthouse. She suddenly thought that she had played a role, and I'm certain that she did. And I got up and apologized to my mother and went to the phone and called Mary. Now, Mary is Al-Anon. Al-Anon invited me to come to AA. And I said, I'll go with you to the next meeting. And we're living out there in the country, and it's 23 years ago, and guess when the next meeting is? The next meeting is tomorrow night. And I tell them that I ain't got no wheelbarrow to go in, but they know that. And they said, we'll come and get you. They didn't want to embarrass me with the fact that we know you're drunk, that you're living with your mother, and we come in at you. So they came and got me and took me to the first AA meeting I ever went to. And when I walked in the door, I said, I'm Dupree, Westbury. I think I'm an alcoholic. And you said, good. You knew, but I didn't know that I was sick. And you knew, but I didn't know that I could get well. You were the first people to tell me, without criticism, that it was all right to be an alcoholic. And you welcomed me and you loved me, and you have from every night and day since then. And I began to go to these meetings regularly, and it wasn't long before I had a brother who was financially able to buy me a car, and I told him I needed a car desperately to go to the meetings, and it was time when the little fancy Ford Mustang convertibles come out, and I persuaded him to buy me a new one. And Daddy would, and I had another brother in the concrete business, and he was paying me $20 a week, and I was driving a truck, and I gave Mama just a little bit of that to help pay the grocery bill, and I kept the rest so I'd have something to put in the basket. And then I sent $10 to the children, and I began to change with your encouragement and with your instruction. Began to change. We had a fellow in the group one time, rarely ever said anything, come out and put his arms around me one night, and he said, Bo, you are growing. I thought I had sprouted a tail or something. He said, when you came here, there was a frown and there was a doubt on your face. Tonight, there's a sparkle in your eye and there's a smile on your face. He said, you are getting well. You are making a change. I didn't go to Alcoholics Anonymous to get happy, to get a wife, and to do all of these things. I just went because I was sick and I desperately needed help. Not for the change, not to be turned into nothing. There's a story back home about this beautiful girl hitchhiking in a town like Amarillo, and she's standing there on the corner with her thumbs out, and this fella sees her, and he pulls up and he stops and he says, "By God, she is pretty. We're going to give her a ride." He opens the door and she gets in, and they start going down the street, and he said, "You're about as pretty as anything I ever saw. I think I'll stop this car and kiss you." And she said, "No, don't do that. I'm a witch." And he said, "Lord, you don't expect me to believe that? Turning rats into horses and pumpkins into golden chariots and all that Cinderella stuff." Said, "Witch or no witch, I'm going to stop this car and kiss you." So he stopped that car and kissed that girl in the mouth, and she turned him into a motel right there. So when we come to AA, we don't want to get turned into nothing. And yet we do, see. Now, I'm getting sober about 4 or 5 months, and there's something we don't talk about much in AA. They still don't do it. I don't know. We're kind of slow in this area, but we're going to talk about it tonight. It's called sex. Every person that ever comes to AA is worried about these two things, sex and sobriety. When am I going to get it, and how long will it last? So I'm invited over to Statesboro, Georgia one night to have dinner with Dr. John Mooney and his wife and some other AA friends, and we're sitting around the table, and I knew how to act at a dinner table. First of all, the couple over there will begin with their remarks, and this fella, whom is my sponsor now, says, "I just really don't understand that governor from West Virginia walking out the Capitol and going to Chicago and joining AA and getting sober, and said he'd rather be a sober cab driver in Chicago than the drunk governor of West Virginia." Well, I couldn't believe that either. I wondered, why he would do that. And then the next man and his wife had something to say, and the next man and his wife had something to say, and then the next man and his wife had something to say, and then it was time for me with no wife to say something. And I said, "I live with Mama." And she's Baptist. And it began to occur to me then, talking about this sex, I said, I think I'm going to get me a trailer and put over on the lake. And incidentally, that's the same place where this home burned, this beautiful home. But anyway, I was going to get me a trailer and put over there for the weekend. Now, we just had meetings on Tuesdays and Thursday nights. We didn't have nothing to do Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And when I recovered, I began to recover all over. And this fellow said, "If you put that trail over there, what do you plan to do?" I said, "Well, Mama's really not big on socializing, and I got this girl that likes to visit me sometime, and I think we just might go over there and fish some." And the fellow said, "No, you can't do that." I said, "Why not?" He said, "If you put that trail over there on that lake, what's going to happen is this. You want to get that girl in there and get her into bed, so you go buy her some whiskey and hope to get her drunk enough to get into bed, and then you're going to have to get drunk to get into bed with her." He said, "The problem with you're in heat and you don't know anything about it." And there's him and his wife, and 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 me and no wife. Did you ever wonder why the people in AA that have it tell the ones that don't have it that they don't need it when it comes to that? Oh, Lord. It's getting better, isn't it? But anyhow, we didn't compromise any issues in the early days of AA. I see a little bit of compromising now. It bothers me sometimes. We didn't have any relapse certificates. In the event you got drunk, you could come back and stay 10 days for another $500. And I'm not criticizing treatment centers. They told me if I didn't stay and if I didn't listen, I'd die. And I stayed. And I walked the path you walked. And I emulated everything you done. And I urge you today, if you are helping a newcomer, for God's sake, tell them the truth, whether it makes you popular or not. I've heard people say in Alcoholics Anonymous, they've been coming for about 2 or 3 years. If nothing don't happen on the 12th next month, I'm going to be sober for 3 years. If nothing don't happen. If you come to Alcoholics Anonymous, something can happen and you can stay sober. And I've heard people say this, well, I don't understand God. And God don't understand some people. Here you are, sober, tonight, in this room, fairly happy, with one of the greatest blessings that God could have bestowed on you. Please don't leave this place and ever tell anybody that again. Let me quote you what a person said one time about mankind. Blessed are those who find their life's work. They should ask for no other blessings. You and I have found our life's work. And if we work this program like we should, we aren't going to have to ever worry about what we need. God's going to give it to us. And I come back home, and I was sober, and I had friends that were drunk. And I went to see them and told them about my sobriety. And I tried to literally drag them in, and they wouldn't go. And one of these boys I grew up with, and his name was John. And I called up John and told him about AA, and he ought to go with me, and he didn't. And one day I got a letter from him, and he was on the chain gang over there in Darlington, South Carolina, where they run that race, cleaning out that ditch. Because he had got drunk at the motel and run around and around the motel, and every time, and he was naked, and every time he got to the flag, he would stop and salute. And it upset the millions, and all the millions ran off into the woods, and the people just couldn't tolerate it and had to put him in on the chain gang. So he told me, he says, would you please, Uncle Duke, would you please come get me? And I went and got him and took him to a meeting. And John become an associate member of AA. He would come to my birthday and your birthday, all eating meetings and nothing else. And one night while I was lying in the bed, the telephone rang, and he said, are you Dupree, Westbury? And I said, I am. And they said, well, your friend John just had a heart attack and he is dying, and he calls your name on his every breath. And I said, my friend John's going to die. And I haven't had the courage to talk to him about the spiritual part of this program. I haven't had the guts, didn't think I had the opportune time to talk to him about God. And he's going to die. And I felt so badly. And I got there, but John didn't die. They had him in a room with another fellow and hooked up to all these wires with which I'm familiar now. And this fellow's laying over there in the bed and paralyzed, and he can't even talk. And I stopped to the nurse's station and told him who it was. I said, well, please go right on back, Mr. Westbury. He's calling you. And I went back there and had him in that oxygen tent, and I ran my hand under the cover and touched his cold arm and told him I'd be back the next day. Could I do anything for him? He said, yes, would you please bring me a bowl of fried squash? I came home and told my wife, I said, I'm going back to visit John tonight, and he wants some fried squash. And she was a nurse, and she said, Dupree, heart patients are not supposed to eat fried squash. I said, I don't remember asking you for your advice. Now, it's all right to get well in Al-Anon, but by God, be a wife, too. So she cooked them damn squash, and I wrapped them up in a bowl, and I went back to the hospital, and I stopped at the nurse's desk, and I said, I'm Dupree Westbury, John's only friend. And my wife is a registered nurse, and she prepared a meal for him. And I went back there, and we had that bowl of squash all wrapped up in tin foil, and they were hot. And I peeled that cover back, and John's trembling hands came out from under that cover and got them fried squash and started eating them. And when he got eat all he could, he said, save the rest of them. And I put them down there by his little nightstand, and he says, Uncle Dupe, I ain't had a cigarette since I've been in here. I said, you got to be kidding. He said, not a one. So I got him up in my arms, wires and everything, and I lit a cigarette and put it in his mouth, and I carried him over to the bathroom so he could smoke and blow the smoke into the bathroom. And this fellow's laying over there paralyzed, and we tell him we go kill him if he says anything. He can't even talk. So if you're an alcoholic and I love you, I'll do anything for you. Anything. And it wasn't too long after that he said, Uncle Duke, there's a woman up here in Bowman lives right close to my sister, needs help. And I knew that woman, and she was some kind of ugly woman. And he says, why don't you come get her and take her to AA like you took me? And I said, no way. This is a personal responsibility that you have. You've read this book now, and you're sober. By God, you get her and take her. So John got this ugly woman, been married about 7, 8 times, and 4 or 5 of them husbands died mysteriously. And come down to that meeting with her, and when he came down there to the meeting, John sat down by and called me over there. And I said, no, John, I think we can help out on this side of the room. Let's me and you go over here and leave over there. So to give out them chips and ask if anybody had an honest desire to stop drinking, that old ugly woman got up and got one. Everybody just as happy. You know, and John took her back home and said, Uncle Dupe, I'm going to give her my big book to read, and you get me another one. I said, you do that. And that was on Thursday night, and Saturday morning, the telephone rang. I was sitting there watching my favorite football team get beat. Everybody I pick out gets beat. And in a few minutes, I'm going to the Baptist College to hear Al Hurt play that horn. I heard him drunk down there in New Orleans one time. Thought I'd try it again sober. And the telephone rang, said, this Dupree? I said, yes. They said, well, because you saved your friend's life, we thought we would call you and let you know that he is dead. Your friend John died. He moved back out to the farm, and when he was moving the stuff into the house, he died. And we found him over the steering wheel, and the car is still running, and you were the first person we called. But that night when I took him that fried squash, a little old dried up preacher come dragging into the room and told me who he was, and I knew who he was because we had donated a steeple to his church in honor of my father. And he said, John, do you believe in prayer? And John said, yes. So the preacher wisely, like Solomon, said, well, pray some then. I want to hear what you got to say. And I heard John make his first prayer. And he flipped to Romans 10:9, whosoever believeth on the name of the Lord shall be saved. I didn't have the guts and the courage. I had the opportunity to tell my friend about God, but I failed. But God let me be there when it happened. And when they undressed him to put him in his coffin, they found that blue chip where he had 17 months of sobriety. And the man that people said wasn't worth a damn died sober. I had another friend like this one time call me one night, 12 o'clock at night. I was getting ready to go to Acapulco. Wasn't planning on taking no big book, no 24-hour book, no nothing. Just going down there and sin all week and come home. And this fella calls me up and says, I want to talk to you. I need a drink bad. And I went around there, and he was Harry before Harry was popular. He's sitting there trembling, looked like he was going to die. And I said, you want me to do what? He said, get me a drink. I said, I wouldn't know a bootlegger if 100 passed in front of this house. I've been sober 7 years, and if you'd been going to AA meetings like you should have, you'd be sober too. No, you home drinking liquor. And boy, I put it on him good. And suddenly this man stopped shaking, and he sat up on the corner of that chair, and he looked me in the eye, and he said, you know, to listen at you talk, one would think that God loves you, but God does not love me. I said, put your britches on, boy. We go find you some liquor. And we went and found him some, and after 2 or 3 drinks, it stayed down. And before I left, he told me he loved me. And I said, please go to the hospital. He said, I plan to go tomorrow. I said, I know you're broke. You don't have any money. You're ashamed. You don't even have enough money for cigarettes and a razor. And I stuffed a sizable bill in his pocket. And I said, Eddie, before you go, buy you some personal items to take with you. And I went to Acapulco, and I came back, and as soon as I got into town, someone said to me, Dupree, have you heard? I said, heard what? Said, your friend Eddie died. He was dead around there in that house a long time before anyone ever found him. And the funeral is today. They've been waiting for you to come back. And I went to the funeral, and we buried Eddie. And there was 400 people at the funeral, and no one had bothered to go to see about the sick man. When 400 people show up to bury one that's dead, and no one goes to see one that's sick, you and I have a lot of work yet to do. A lot of blessings have happened to me since I've been in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Too countless to name, and I don't need to go through all of that. I worked the steps like the young lady said this afternoon. One of the most difficult things in the world for me to ask for is forgiveness. The other night at a closed meeting, the chairperson got up and he said, I want to talk about forgiveness and forgetting. And asked me what my remarks were, and I said, I'll tell you what it used to be. If I loved you, I'd forgive you, and if I did not, forget you, and let it go at that. This is the one thing that God talks the most about, forgiveness, and mankind talks the least about, forgiveness. And the 10th step is forgiveness, saying I'm sorry. We had 2 people walking down the street one time, and one of them was unmarried and pregnant, and the other one looked at it, she said, you look like you in the motherly fashion. She says, I am. She says, do you know who done it? She says, yes. She said, who was it? Said, it was John. Said, have you told John yet? She said, yes, I told him. She said, well, what did John say? John said, excuse me. You know, anytime we do anything wrong in life and we ask for forgiveness, and we ask for forgiveness seriously, and we forgive people, this is all that God asks for. Why should man ask for more than God asks for? I came home one evening, and my wife met me at the back door in my early sobriety with a butterfly pin way high up on the shoulder. Heard that from one of them Texas women. The only people we ever saw from Texas were speakers. We never knew anybody was in the audience. And had that butterfly pinned up there and all puckered up at the back door wanting to kiss. I said, what, you some damn sex maniac or something hanging out this back door wanting to kiss everybody that comes by? Just made her feel real bad. She turned around and went back in the house. And I went on back into the bedroom and started doing my hands for dinner and cleaning up. And I looked at the mirror, and the things that you taught me jumped out at me. And the things you said, Dupree, this is not AA. You got to ask for forgiveness. I got to go in that kitchen and I got to say, please forgive me for what I said. I really did not mean that. And if I do it, I'm going to feel better. But I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it. I never saw an alcoholic yet break his or her arm running to somebody to apologize. And I'm sitting there wanting to do it and couldn't do it, and suddenly God said to me, well, if you can't tell her, why don't you write her a note? So I said, well, that's a splendid idea. So I wrote her a note, please forgive me, I did not mean what I said. And signed my name, and I carried it in the kitchen and laid it down on the counter, and I said, it looks so, God, that isn't very much. So I get a beautiful vase and go in the yard and get a beautiful rose. And I bring the rose and the vase and the note, and I lay it down on the counter right in front of Eleanor. And she reads it. And with the wisdom of Solomon, she picks up a pen and writes on the bottom, you are forgiven. She knew I was unable to say it verbally. She didn't want to embarrass me with it, so that's what she said. I didn't have to sleep on my side of the bed or dare cross that double yellow line. And walk around all week and pout about it, and just let it wear off. Courage to change the things we can and the wisdom to know the difference. That's what this program teaches. This is what the speaker talked about this afternoon. This pathway to freedom. Utilizing these steps. The courage. The promises tell us that God is suddenly doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Yet we sit on our behinds and we read page 83 and 84 and think that God's going to do all of it. He didn't say that. It said God will do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And we can ask for forgiveness when we are wrong to another individual. It also says on that same page that spirituality in this program is not a theory. It has to work and be worked in our lives. It's not a theory, but it's an excellent formula. The wisdom to know the difference. There were two cannibals one time riding in a canoe down in the British Guiana in the South Pacific looking for somebody to eat. And the boy was sitting up in the front of the boat, and the daddy was doing the paddling, and he went around this corner and has this beautiful 18-year-old girl up there taking a bath. And the boy saw her first. And he says, ooh, Daddy, look at what's up there in the water. Let's catch her and take her home with us. And Daddy swung that boat around where he could see her. And he says, yes, we're going to catch her and take her home with us, but we go cook your mama. Now that's the wisdom to know the difference. Not long ago, and it seems like a long time ago, one evening the police came to my house and asked where my daughter was. And I said, I don't know. Well, she just left a whiskey store a while ago drunk up on the interstate, and she had what may or may not have been a gun, and she was drinking, and she pulled this gun out and playing with the attendant up there that she knew and told her it was a holdup. And the girl recognized her just before she reached for a gun to kill her. And when Darlene came home and got out of the car, drunk and dribbly, I walked over and started beating her in the face. And my wife came up to me and she says, I cannot believe this. You said for 18 years that you were an alcoholic. And for 18 years you have been sober. And yet you cannot recognize alcoholism in your own family. And this was a beautiful girl. One who had been a model since she was 15 years old. My eyeball. My heart beat. And there she was drunk. So I told her to get in the damn car. I'll take you over to John Mooney and have him fix you. Get you sober. And I got over there and got to talking with Dr. John, and she talked with him, and she said, Doctor, I'm not ready to stop drinking. I don't care what Daddy said. And John looked at me with a great deal of sadness in his own eyes. And he says, Dupree, at least you know where your daughter is. Mine is drunk somewhere, and I don't even know where she is. My suggestion to you is that you go home and join Eleanor. And I went home, and it was sometime in September, And I walked into that Al-Anon room, and when I walked in, they knew why I was there. And they said, Dupree, you're not responsible for her alcoholism. And you've got to detach. You've got to quit giving her $50,000 a year to spend. You've got to stop buying her fancy sport cars and all of this stuff. You're enabling your child to kill herself. And they pulled out that little old book, that ADAT thing they called it. And they read a portion from that book, and it went something like this. It was a quotation from Tolstoy. I ride on man's back, grasping and struggling with him as he goes. I would have the whole world think I would like to help his cause, and I will do anything for him but get off his back. And this is what I was doing to my family. I was killing my children by enabling them to kill themselves with drugs and alcohol. So I detached. During that time, the woman that I married as a friend, we learned that we were just friends. We shouldn't have been married. And because we were Baptists and because we lived in a little small area, we decided we wouldn't get a divorce because her mama wouldn't like it and my mama wouldn't like it. And we just kept right on living together in that house. And she got so well in Al-Anon, when I'd come home in the evening, I'd say, so and so and so. She said, well, now you work your program and I'll work mine. Don't ever get that well. And one day we decided we were going to get a divorce. And we did. And it was hard for me to accept. And I was speaking in San Antonio, Texas, and I felt guilty about some of the things that I had done and said to her. And I flew back through Fort Worth, and I stopped there with old Jim W. And I said, Jim, I feel guilty about something. I need some help. And I told him about it. And he said, give me your hand. And Eloise took the other hand, and 4 people that I didn't even know took their hands, and we got out on our knees. Now, mind you, I've been sober 21 years in AA. And here I am having to get down on my knees and pray in front of strangers and ask for forgiveness. And before the week passed, God answered all of the things that was causing problems for me. That little old girl got drunk and called me a year and a half ago, Daddy, something bad happened over the 4th of July weekend. I said, I know, you're overdrawn. I'll go to the bank and I'll put some money in there for you. But I knew what it was. She had got drunk and cussed out everybody in a beautiful old dime restaurant in Charleston and just really showed her ass. And I says, I'll put some money in the bank. She said, no, Daddy, that's not it. I said, well, what could it be? I meant for her to say it. She said, Daddy, I've got a drinking problem. I need help. And I went down there, and I took her to a hospital, a treatment center that I was on the board of directors. And she was admitted that Thursday. And that was July the 7th, 1985. So she's got a year and 3 months. I married Kathy, and we have a beautiful little old girl called Catherine Elizabeth, and we call her Doodle. And she doesn't know her daddy's old. And she doesn't know her daddy's an alcoholic. But the other day when all of this sickness came on me suddenly, she missed her daddy. And I had to go into this hospital, and I had to take a lot of drugs, and a lot of things happened, and I died July the 22nd. And I had read in magazines where people died, and they would go down tunnels and see music, hear music, and see lights and all sorts of things. And I said, well, what a bunch of crap that is. And I'm in this catheterization room, And they done run that bulb through my heart 3 times trying to open up that hole, and it won't stay open. And suddenly everything that's conscious quits. And sudden blackness comes before me, and I don't know how long it lasts. A long time. And when I wake up, the cardiologist is in my face screaming at me to wake up and to calm down. And 4 people are holding me, and they'll have those electric things on me. And he said, "You died, and we brought you back to life." And they took me into that room and cut me open, and they give me morphine and all kind of dope, and saved my life. Saved my life. Kathy and I are happily married now. I had some trouble coming off of those drugs. 16 days of morphine and Demerol was not my choice. My wife told that doctor day after day, "He's an alcoholic and he's a drug addict. Don't give him that." And the doctor one day, doctors do first things first. Did you know that? Now, when you go there with a heart attack and you tell them you're an alcoholic, they ain't got no special room and a procedure to treat you. They just run you right straight through the middle, just like they do everybody else. And he looked at her and he says, "What difference does it make? He'll probably die anyway." So we can't expect any special attention when we go there. And when I came home, I didn't have any regret. I didn't have any remorse, John. And I felt very good. I was walking around in my sun shorts and entertaining my mother and talking to my friends. And the Baptist preacher come and said, "You ain't got no anger and resentment?" I said, "No." And after I ran out of that medication, and old Dupree got to be human again, and my behind hit the ground, and suddenly I began to withdraw, and all the torches of hell came flushing back through my body. And I remembered then what it was like again. And my son came to see me in that hospital, and he saw me shaking there on that bed, and he said, "Daddy, what's going on?" I said, "I'm having to withdraw from all this morphine they gave me while they were saving my life. Look very closely, Manning. This is why your mother had to leave me." And he came over and he put his arms around my head and he kissed me and he cried. And this daughter who hated my young wife because she thought that Kathy wanted the millions that I got and she wouldn't get her damn fair share, come rushing down there to the hospital, and they make up. So this stubborn damn family of mine won't get well until I almost die. And I like to not got to Amarillo. I've talked too long, I always do, but it took me 3 years to get here. I'm happy tonight. I'm happy for you tonight. I'm happy for my friends that I met that I didn't know until I got here. I'm happy for Ken and Shirley that I spent the day with, for Jay and Joanna. And I'm happy for Dolly for inviting me, even though it caused a damn heart attack. Kathy and I just dearly love Texas. We love it. So we'll just come out here for anything if you call us. You don't even have to pay our expenses. We'll just come. We love to come out here. You're great and beautiful people, and we love you very much. God has been truly good to me. He evidenced this recently in my life, and He has now for 23 years. And I think it was Rudyard Kipling who wrote one time, "The race does not always belong to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, but that is the way I would bet. You and I did not win the race, and we lost the battle, and yet we won." Thank you.